Hello, my name is Kerrioth, and today we're going to talk about one of the traitor Primarchs again. So, I think was it last week? Probably last week. I lose track of time very easily at the moment. I talked about Lorgar and why Lorgar is essentially my favourite Primarch. I admittedly phrased it as the best Primarch, but if you can't throw a little bit of hyperbole around when you're talking about stuff you like, when can you throw it around? And I kind of thought to myself, I enjoyed doing that video, and I enjoyed the process of getting my thoughts on him across, as to why I like Lorgar so much, and why I feel that he's one of the more interesting characters when it comes to the Primarchs as a whole. And then I immediately started reading Betrayer again, because Betrayer is a fantastic book, and I've come to the conclusion that whilst Lorgar is my favourite Demon Primarch, I'm pretty sure at this point that Angron is my second favourite. I think, if I'm absolutely honest, I must just be a dirty, filthy heretic at heart, because I find myself identifying, or at least empathising with the traitors a lot more than perhaps one should. Let's face it, the Emperor was never exactly a brilliant father figure. He was kind of shit in that role, as it turns out. But I feel as though no other Primarch was quite as badly treated or quite as unequivocally fucked over as Angron was. They all had their issues, they all had their problems, they all had their things that they needed to overcome. I mean, Corax is an example of someone who I think did pretty well in overcoming the troubles that he had. Nighthaunter not so much. Curse was absolutely deranged. He was, I think it's fair to say, pretty much insane from the start, even if he was not really capable of recognising it. It might sound a little bit harsh, but he had a definite brutal streak that demonstrably didn't really do the job, even though he was convinced that it did. They kind of had their issues because of things that were built into them physically or mentally or psychically from the very start. They had their problems from their inception, and they either didn't deal with them or dealt with them admirably. Angron is, I think, fairly unique in that he is one of the few Primarchs to be just absolutely shit on for no reason. See, Angron, out of all of them, had the worst start, I would argue. He was taken as a slave almost immediately and became a gladiator that had horrendous, techno-barbarian stuff hammered literally into his brain. His ability to think, his ability to feel, his ability to be what the Primarchs were designed to be, it was hampered from the very start, not because of something that the Emperor did, and not because of something he did, but because of something that his captors did. He had a rough start to begin with. He did not have a good time. He didn't conquer the planet he landed on. He didn't rule it. Instead, he just fought constantly, endlessly, under the watch of the rulers of that place. He had a really, really terrible beginning, and he had no way really of fixing that himself. Aside from breaking free and forming an army, which is something he did, there's not a huge amount that Angron could have ever done to escape the situation that he was in. He did everything that he could have done, and then set himself essentially a goal, which was to die. He knew full well that his army of slaves, his army of gladiators, were not going to succeed. They were not going to win. It was not going to be some sort of victorious battle whereby at the end of it they went, we have defeated all of your trained armies, we are now in charge. He never prepared himself mentally for that. Instead, he prepared himself for dying alongside the people that he cared about. He had a complete bond of brotherhood that was made through blood and disaster and loss, and he only really had one wish, which was to actually die fighting at the side of his brothers and sisters. That in itself is surprisingly noble when you consider where he's come from. That is not the attitude of someone who is completely lost. That is not the attitude of someone who is without hope or without reason or without the ability to feel. He clearly still had those capacities, and he clearly set himself on what he deemed to be a fitting and dignified end to a life that was not fitting or dignified for someone of his kind of engineered destiny. He should have been so much more than he was, and he may not have realised just how much more than he should have been before the Emperor arrived, but he could tell that he was different, and he set himself that life goal, not of conquering, not of ruling, not of becoming some sort of all-encompassing warlord or diplomat or general, but to just have the opportunity to fight and die at the side of the people that he cared about. I feel as though he is unique in the Primarchs in the way that the Emperor handled him by seemingly having absolutely no regard for his personal feelings at all. Now, obviously, when the Emperor created the Primarchs, he didn't create them and then decide, and they can just piss off and do whatever they like, although that is largely kind of what ended up happening. They are tools. They were things made for him. They were designed primarily to assist him in his conquering of the galaxy, to, propel humanity into into what should be its dominant position as the strongest things out there. But for some reason, when it came to Angron, there was absolutely no attempt made to placate or to assist or to help or to do anything that would actually make him feel as though he had any worth outside of being worthy of a good death, which is essentially where he was at. There are several references throughout the Horus Heresy of the kind of sheer unfairness of the way that the Emperor handled Angron. And no matter how you look at it, he handled him terribly and for no good reason. I mean, the Emperor is not he's not a being that is scared of doing what needs to be done. He could have quite easily just annihilated everything from orbit, recruited Angron and his army of gladiators, and things probably would have been rosy for a while anyway. Things would have worked for a bit until the Butcher's Nails started to affect him even more. I mean, as they went on, they became more and more damaging to his brain, to his mind, to his body. He was incredibly unstable. He was in almost never-ending pain. It was obviously not a good way to be. But the Emperor could have actually had some functional use out of this creation he had spent so long on. He could have done something other than what he did, because essentially he took the one thing that Angron wanted, the one thing that he needed more than anything else, which was to fall in battle at the sides of the people that he loved, and just took it away. He could have annihilated the governments of Nuceria immediately. Hell, he could have basically just gone down there by himself and probably wiped out populations on his own. The Emperor was at the time vastly powerful. I mean, he's powerful in a different way on the Golden Throne, but it was a very physical, raw sort of power. He was capable of feats that no one else was capable of. He could have single-handedly solved the issue. He could have given the World Eaters over to Angron straight away, and they could have assisted. They could have destroyed the armies of Nuceria. They could have essentially fought at the side of their Primarch for the first time in a battle of bonding, assisting their Primarch against the people who had held him as a slave, assisting their Primarch in protecting those that he cared about, his brothers and sisters in war. And instead he just teleported him out of there and was like, yeah, you're locked in this ship, just do as I say. And no matter how you shake it, no matter how you look at it, that's fucking awful. Like, that's a terrible thing to do. To take the one hope, the one goal that someone has, and deny them completely of that goal, with no consideration as to how that would affect them, with no consideration as to how it would damage them, when there are so many other options. Now, maybe it wasn't worth the time. Maybe the planet was compliant immediately, and there was no sense for bloodshed. Maybe it was something as simple as that planet was needed in the condition it was in, and that was the best way to achieve it. In a way, it doesn't really matter because it comes to a weighing of priorities. That planet, no matter how good or helpful it could be to the Imperium, is not going to be as helpful or good for the Imperium as having a functional son of the Emperor, as having a Primarch who views the Emperor as worthy of his respect. He didn't get that from Angron. The way that Angron was taken from his home, and the way that he was denied the destiny that he believed he should have had, did not instill him with some sort of deep respect for his father or some sort of greater knowledge as to how the Imperium should function. It made him angry and resentful and completely devastated to his very core, to the extent that there was never going to be any possibility, hello again dog, that he would do anything other than hate the Emperor for the rest of his existence. And who can really blame him? It is literally a case of the Emperor took everything that he had away from him, and he had almost nothing to begin with. Angron, I think, is one of the most interesting Primarchs because his story isn't actually that complex. One of the things I like about Lorgar is how complex he's a character. The same thing with like Guilliman as well. I like characters who seem simple on the outside but are actually complex on the inside. Angron is actually fairly simple all the way through. He had nothing. Everything he should have been was taken away from him, and when the one person who could have assisted with this, who could have changed him for the better, arrived, they just did what everyone else had already done, which was continue to take what little he had. Angron is like the biggest tragedy of all the Primarchs to me, because it's something that is so reversible and easily fixed. Yeah, the Butcher's nails were never going to come out. He was never going to be a 100% functional Primarch, not the way he should have been. But there could have been so many years of use. He could have been so more easily controlled if any attempt had been made to gain his respect. But no attempt was made to gain his respect. No attempt was made to treat him as the being that he should have been. Instead, he was just taken away and expected to do what he was told. There is never going to be any other outcome from doing that. That is the worst way to handle it. It is the perfect example of the Emperor basically putting goal above the family that he created. Now, he never particularly considered himself a father figure. If you read through the Horus Heresy, it's made pretty clear that the Emperor was a father for convenience's sake and not because he actually felt that way. But still, as one of the most intelligent creatures to have appeared in the universe at that stage, you'd think that he might look at a situation like Angron's and say, how best do I make this damaged, broken person work for me? How do I put them at ease? How do I put their mind at rest? How do I help them to become everything they could be? But it doesn't feel like he did that, and that's the biggest tragedy. Angron never had a chance, even when the one person who could give him that chance arrived. He just had it shit from the start, and when the person who could put a stop to the shit appeared in his life, they did nothing to fix it. They just took what little he had, and that was his lot. There's a lot of stuff that I see where people are like, Angron is at least as much to blame as anyone else for what happened with the World Eaters and for their descent into just being bloodthirsty butchers. Why did he insist on having nails placed into their heads? Well, the answer to that is pretty simple. He had a family once. He had a family that had exactly the same thing that he had, which were the nails. That family was taken away from him by the person who was demanding that he call them father. He wanted a new family. He never had the chance to die with his first family, and that was all he ever wanted. And so he created a second family out of the World Eaters. But funnily enough, that isn't enough. Just replacing something with a surrogate doesn't work. You can't ever truly replace something that you care about on that kind of level. You can find something else to care about. You can care about something as much, but it will never replace that initial thing. It will never replace that first connection. It will never replace that first person. And all of that was taken away. So, of course, he was going to go down that route. Of course, he was going to try and make another army that was the same as his previous army. He needed that connection back, but he never got it. He never got it, and the resentment and the anger and the hatred and the damage and the physical issues caused by the nails just grew and grew. And then, funnily enough, if someone says, the Emperor is shit and I'm going to take him down, the person who had their life taken away by the Emperor, who had their family taken away by the Emperor, funnily enough, they're going to turn as well. They're not going to go, okay, well, he treated me like shit and did nothing to help, but, you know, he's not a bad egg. Of course, that's not going to happen. It's years of pent-up anger over something that didn't need to happen. He's not that complicated a character, Angron. I don't think he's hugely complex. I think he should have been hugely complex, but the thing that makes him so interesting is the fact that that complexity was stolen from him. There's a line in one of the books, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, where he's described as like a ruined statue, or a fallen angel or something. He should have been so much more than he actually was, but he never had the opportunity to be so. And as a result, you end up with one of the most kind of dangerous, one of the most deranged, one of the most bloodthirsty opponents in the 40k universe as a whole. He's just an avatar of rage, and he is there to kill and kill and kill again. And whilst it might not be 100% preventable, whilst it's quite probable that he would have always fallen, there could have at least been more of a battle for that to happen. There could have at least been more in the way of a personal struggle. As it was, there didn't need to be a personal struggle, because what other choice would you even make in that position? There is only one choice, and that was to turn traitor immediately, because why the fuck would you not do that based on the way that the rest of your life has gone? So that's why I think Angron is quite possibly my second favourite Primarch. No, not as complex as Lorgar, but his simplicity is one of the things that makes him so interesting, and it's more the situations that surrounded him, the circumstances he was in, that make him just that bit more relatable. Everyone gets affected by stuff that they can't control. Angron feels like the ultimate victim of that. He was rarely, if ever, in control of his own destiny, and as a result, well, now he is a massive demon Primarch, which, let's be honest, is also kind of awesome. Anyway, that went on a bit, didn't it? Thank you very much for watching. As always, there's the usual array of things to click. There's a couple of videos, subscribe, Patreon, all of that shit. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to, and I will see you for whatever the next video is. Toodaloo.